Okay, Indra Den Bakker from Overstory. Welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here, Jason. Thank you for having us.
Well, I'm excited to have you. We met you, gosh, maybe about a couple months ago or so, and learned a little bit about what you're doing and liked it a lot. And so when it came time to launch this new series, I thought it'd be really interesting to dig in and learn more about it, and also to introduce it to anyone in the MCJ community that isn't familiar with it, because we think it's great.
Sounds awesome.
So you've got some slides. Shall we jump in?
Yeah, sounds perfect. First, introduce myself, and then we can go to the slides.
Sounds
So
great.
Indra, CEO and co-founder of Overstory. Background in computational intelligence. Worked as a data scientist for several years, mainly in advertising technologies. And around 2 years ago, decided that I want to do more with my skills than selling more ads to people. Learned a lot, of course, but that's a bit where my climate journey started. And via machine learning competition to detect deforestation in the Amazon rainforest with satellite imagery and machine learning, where my team did pretty well. I think we ended up 5th out of 1,000 teams. That's when me and my co-founder Anik started discussing what else can we do with satellite imagery and machine learning to look at our forest and help protect them. And that was the starting point for Overstory.
And so how did you actually land? And I know you're gonna get into what you're doing, but how did you pick this lane? Did you look at many before you landed on this, or how did it actually come about?
Yeah, we were mostly thinking about where can our backgrounds. So my co-founder Nick has a background in psychology and business. I in machine learning, where can we add the most value? And computer vision was quite booming then. Deep learning was coming up, of course. And we saw a big need in more data for forest industry or forest in general. And we saw a gap there. I think satellite imagery have been used for decades already. But really understanding vegetation on a planet at scale, I think that was something that was lacking, and that we felt that we could fill the gap with our backgrounds. And then we started there. We bootstrapped the first year, really finding a good market. And then second year, we did the Techstars program. And then we really grew the team from there, building where we felt that we could add the most value.
Which Techstars program did you do, by the way?
Lisbon, Portugal.
Nice. Yeah. Of course, we've got a bunch of Techstars people in the MCJ community. So, and actually, the MCJ office, but well, at least before the pandemic, was on the same floor of a co-working space with the whole Techstars Boston crew. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Great. Well, why don't we jump in?
Yeah. So yeah, I think I don't have to tell this community that our planet is under pressure. Forests are disappearing at an alarming rate due to deforestation, insect outbreaks, forest fires. And data-driven information is needed to improve decision-making about our natural resources. I think one of the most severe causes of forest loss at the moment are forest fires. And not only do they release huge amounts of CO2 in short time when they burn, these fires also damage forests that would otherwise remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And one of the major causes of these wildfires are actually the interaction between power lines and trees. And that's one of the major causes, for example, in California, but it's also a widespread problem. So 50% of all burned area in California is actually caused by this interaction. When a tree touches a power line, it can result in a spark and severe fires. And on a global scale, it represents 1% of global CO2 emissions, billions of economic losses, and also millions of households without power.
One question before we go on: does for the power lines, is it that they are set up wrong, or they have some mechanical failure, or lightning strikes, or things like that, or is it just that they're set up right, and anytime they run into contact with the trees, there's a fire risk?
It can be a combination of those factors. And I think what we see is if the vegetation is well maintained and also the power lines and the towers itself, then it significantly reduces the chance on forest fires. But both needs to happen to prevent those. And it's...
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's it covers large areas, of course, so it's a challenging task, and we still rely a lot on this transmission and distribution lines.
And you might get into this later. So if you do, then let's put this on hold. But the land that the power lines are on, is that typically to the people that have accountability for the power lines? Are those the landowners, or are they different? In other words, like, is there bureaucracy and a lack of accountability, or is there kind of centralized oversight of this maintenance and upkeep?
Yeah, the utilities are in general responsible for the right of ways. So they are responsible to maintain the vegetation in and around the power lines.
Uh-huh. And do they also own the land?
Not always. So they're not officially the owner of the land, but they have the right to cut down the trees if they see they are growing towards the power line.
Okay, thanks.
And that's actually one of their main cost elements as well. They are actually spending a lot of money on vegetation management. It's often one of their largest line items on their operational spend. So utilities spend up to hundreds of millions per year per utility on vegetation management alone. And 10 to 20% of that budget is on the inspection. As you can imagine, also the work has to be done, but the inspection is often 10 to 20% of that budget.
And you also might get into this later, but who is actually doing that work? What's the portfolio of options for how that work is being done today in terms of in-house versus outside firm versus, whatever else?
It's a combination of everything. So some of the large utilities, they buy their own helicopters. They buy very expensive helicopters to fly around and see where trees pose a threat to their power lines. They have drones, their own people flying drones, but sometimes it's also third-party contractors. So the landscape is quite scattered there, and there's no solution that works well for all utilities. Because when flying those helicopters and drones, it still takes them up to 4 or 7 years to scan the entire grid only once. As you can imagine, like, these trees are very dynamic. They grow, they are affected by weather and climate. So having those scans of the vegetation around the power lines only once in several years, that doesn't solve their problem at the moment. And in the west coast of the US, you see it, the main problem are fires. In the east coast is more storm damage. And we have the same problems here in Europe, in northern and southern Europe, with fires and storm damages. And as I mentioned, it takes them up to 4 years to scan the entire grid. They put a lot of money in it, but despite all these efforts, this problem is not solved. And that's actually where we come in. So we provide data-driven, real-time vegetation intelligence.
Indra, one question about that not solved. Is it that it's being addressed, but it's prohibitively expensive, or that it's not being addressed adequately, or both?
Both, I would say, yeah. Depends a bit on the region and public opinion regulation. But every utility would agree that these problems are getting more severe because of climate change.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so I think what we found out is that our technology was a strong fit to help solve this problem. To at least start with filling that gap of data about the vegetation around the power lines. And we use satellite imagery, which can scan the entire grid every day if we need. And I think that's a big difference with the traditional methods that are currently being used. And we use different types of satellites. And I think moving forward, it's also very strong that there's more and more satellites being launched. It's getting cheaper. So we can almost get real-time updates about land use.
And where do you get that data from?
Yeah, so we've partnered with all major satellite imagery providers. We have Planet, Maxar, Airbus. We have some new satellite providers, SAR providers coming up as well. And what we see is there's a lot of data being collected, but the real value is, of course, in the information derived from these images or data and making it actionable for example, utilities. And one of the nice things about satellite imagery is that it also has multi and hyperspectral data. So it's not only RGB, but we also have near infrared and other red edge bands that tell a lot about, for example, tree species, but also tree health, which is also something dynamic that we monitor. And then we use not only one images, but multiple images to create a really accurate 3D map of the vegetation, and combine that with frequent updates. We really understand what is growing there, what is changing, and what is impacting the power lines now, but also in the future. Because we know the species, we also can predict future risks.
Well, I have some questions, but keep going because you might cover them. And then if you don't, I'll ask them.
Yeah, sounds good. So one thing to fuel, it's a lot of data that comes together in one place, and that's where our intelligence lies. So we have a lot of data from the ground, from foresters that really collected, for example, 150,000 trees that were infested, uh, marked on tree level on the ground, and we mapped it to our aerial or satellite images to train our algorithms. So this is really a system of intelligence that gets smarter over time by feeding it more and more data. And it tells a lot about the dynamic environment of trees and forests. And we use that to feed our machine learning algorithms. On one side, supervised algorithms, but because we also have so much data about our planet coming in every day, we also use unsupervised methods. And things we can extract from these data sources are, for example, tree height. So how high are the trees? What is their segmentation? But also risk, like fire risk and storm damage risk. And we do that by looking at a more holistic view at our forest. So if you know the species, you know the health of the tree at the moment, you know also which trees pose a higher risk for the power lines. So it's moving also, what utilities now usually do is they have fixed timed trimming cycles, and we help them move to more risk-based trimming cycles.
And does it matter whether the utility is doing this in-house versus using outside partners in terms of how good a fit it is for your services?
I would say it fits for both parties. So some of the large utilities, they have large data science team in-house, but we are really specialized in extracting these information from satellite imagery. We have the training data and the trained machine learning algorithms, so we can help them right away. So I think that's a great fit for them. Then we also have utilities that are less hands-on. They have the vegetation manager, and we can help them with our online platform to identify the risk and send out the contractors to the right spots.
For the ones that use outside partners to do this work, are you primarily providing this data and insight to the utility or to the partner? And who is that data most relevant for?
At the moment, mostly to the utility, because they are still responsible for the work being done. We've seen that in the past as well, where a utility already identified a risk zone, but the work was actually not completed by the contractor. And that's something we help with as well. Because we have frequent updates, we can see if the work by a contractor is actually done in time and can flag it if it didn't happen. So I think for the utility, that is a real benefit of using our technology now as well. I can see it being used by the contractors as well in the future, because it can help them optimize their workflow as well. And that's something we're moving towards more in the future.
And functionally, what function and what level of person is the one who is best equipped to interface with this data and make it actionable on the utility side?
Yeah, so we have different versions of our dashboard. We have a very high level metrics driven, which is really for a non-tech user just to see where to go, what are the miles that are currently encroached by vegetation. Mm-hmm. And then we also have technical users that can really dive into the data and inspect what is happening more on a segment by segment basis.
Okay, well, let's keep going. I mean, I have more questions, but you might cover them.
Yeah, and by extracting this information, we do not only shed a light on the risk today, but it helps also to predict future risks. So that's super valuable for our customers, because then they can really optimize their workflows as well and make sure that there's no fires or outages happening in the future. So that's
go ahead.
Yeah, so that's also the main benefits for our customers. So really getting real-time insights into those encroachments, while previously they had 4 or 7 year cycles. They can plan ahead, so plan their contractor work with their contractors more ahead, not only for the next 6 months, but also 12 to 18 months. And then also verify if that work by those contractors is actually done in time, yes or no. In the end, resulting in cost saving due to more efficient monitoring and more targeted maintenance efforts, but ultimately, of course, the reduction of outages, wildfires, and fines.
And where are you in terms of go-to-market? When did it launch? Do you have people using it today?
Good question. Yeah, so that's actually next slide. So by bootstrapping the first 2.5 years, we did different projects for different verticals. So we also have forest industry customers. We have NGOs like Rainforest Alliance as customers. And since 1 year, we've been focusing more on electric utilities because we saw a strong need in that market. So we already provide intelligence in over 54 countries across the globe. We have over 10 paying enterprise customers. For example, EDP and Red Electrica are utilities in the south of Europe. We also have in the north of Europe customers like Husqvarna Group and Stora Enso. And we're currently focusing more on the US. I think what's interesting on the US is that you also have more of the distribution lines above ground, while in Europe, most of the distribution lines are below ground.
And is this a subscription model, or how is it priced, and what term are these agreements typically?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a subscription model. Often we do a base layer where we scan their entire grid once to have a very solid base, and then they pay a monthly fee based on the area size and the update frequency that they subscribe to these intelligence to get updates. Can be that some utilities have monthly updates, some quarterly, some are moving too much real time. So it really depends on the utility. And in total, we now have signed over $800,000 of revenue.
Can you go back to the slide just before this for a minute? So the customer benefits here, the real-time encroachment insights, the planning ahead with predicted risks and tracking, verifying the work of contractors. Any case studies or any way to quantify in terms of the actual ROI to the customer for using this service, and also in which area, if you look at those bullets, have you found that the ROI has been most impactful to date?
Yeah, definitely. So we're working on launching some public case studies with some of our customers. As you can imagine, these cycles are often full year. So what we do is often a contract for a full year where we guide them through the full process of planning for the year, and then also doing the scanning every month or every quarter. So we're waiting for one cycle to fully finish to quantify it. So we're also really eager to share those results, of course. And what we see is like the first step, like showing them where encroachment is happening now. That is already so much value for them because that's something they didn't have before. So we see that is really valuable to start with. But the second point and the third point is of course really important moving forward, because then you can really optimize for your management practices as well.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and next to our customers, we've also spent a lot of time on partnering up with the satellite imagery provider. We discussed it before. We use a range of them. All of them have their own strength. We combine them and fuse them in our algorithms to provide these intelligence. And we see it also as a bigger ecosystem. So we have the utilities, the forest around it, and there's different stakeholders interested in the same data. We have the contractors that we briefly discussed before, but you also have reinsurance companies covering those lands, forest industry responsible for the forest next to it, and then also local landowners and governments. So we see it as a bigger ecosystem. But long term, this is also just the beginning. We see that we can not only help utilities, but also forest industry, NGOs, governments. We don't only have forests, we also have freshwater, seawater, agriculture. So we're really on a mission to become that standard in planet intelligence, monitoring all those natural resources on Earth in real time.
Can you go back to the ecosystem slide again? So if you look at that ecosystem, and it sounds like utilities are your initial entry point, what is the relevance of these other players in terms of the Overstory vision and direction, and where does Overstory fit in a broader way beyond just the utilities?
Yeah, so we are really on a mission to make data-driven, to help these large companies improve their decision-making by providing real-time data about our natural resources. We are now starting with utilities because the need is the highest there, and we can really help them today. Mm-hmm. But in general, we see that all these large corporates or governmental bodies, they lack the granularity in the data they have to improve their decision making. And that's something we envision that we can help a lot with by providing that data and also adding that predictive part so that we know what's happening now, but also what will change in the future.
And the utilities, how were they getting this data in a world where Overstory didn't exist? Were they flying totally blind, or are there other alternatives in the market?
Currently, what we get back from the market is that most of them actually go by foot. So they are semi-blind. Of course, they have an idea where forests are. But like I mentioned, these forests are continuously changing. There's encroachment. So there's really a lack of data. And what we see in the recent years is that they bought helicopters and drones to fill that gap. But it didn't fill their needs as well, right? Because it's still not timely. And that makes our technology more actionable because you really know what's happening now and what will happen in the foreseeable future.
And when you think about timelines, how long do you think you'll be focused only on the utility market, and when will you start thinking about expansion?
Yeah, so we're currently already serving several other customers in this ecosystem and in the bigger place. So we have Rainforest Alliance as a customer certification body of coffee, cocoa, and tea. So we scan entire countries for them as well. But we use really utilities to grow faster and scale from there. But I think we want to make it also really valuable for utilities to make sure we can help solve their problems. So in the next 12 to 18 months, we'll definitely focus on utilities.
And just for some context, what does the team look like today, and how has the company been capitalized to date?
Good question. Next slide. So we're now with a team of 7. I also have a background in computational intelligence. Our CTO, Roelof, has a background in anthropology and AI, previously co-founded Creative AI. And as I mentioned, our CEO, Anik, has a background in business and psychology. And then we're complemented with a team of data scientists and business experts that are also really on a mission to help protect the Earth's natural resources. To date, like I mentioned, last year we did the Techstars program in Lisbon. We took a pre-seed funding there, and we recently closed a seed round of $1.7 million to continue our growth.
Congrats.
Thank you.
And how far do you hope that capital gets you? What's the next milestone that you're driving towards?
Yeah, for us, it's really important in the next, let's say, 18 months to continue our growth, show that this is a market that we can grow in further. So really making sure we hit our annual recurring revenue targets before the next round. And we'll partly use the money to grow our tech team because we want to expand our capabilities as well, make sure it works on a global scale, and partly also on the business side.
So, sounds great. And where do you need help, Indra? For anybody that's listening that's excited about what you're doing, are you hiring? Are there certain kinds of partnerships or customers that you'd want to talk to, or advisors that you need? How can the MCJ community help you?
Yeah, I think all of those. For sure, we're hiring as well. So on the business side, we're looking to make our first hire in the US. So we'd welcome anyone reaching out or any introductions. Mainly we'll be responsible for our go-to-market in North America. Mm-hmm. And then on the tech side, we're also hiring here in Amsterdam, Netherlands, to grow our capabilities there. And in general, happy to chat with anyone in the community to learn more about their problems. Specifically around electric utilities, but I can imagine also around forests and trees in general.
And for anyone that's listening that wants to learn more, how should they get in touch?
The last slide, so perfect question. My email is on here. I'm also in the MCJ Slack, so feel free to reach out. Like I mentioned, happy to connect with everyone that's also interested in forest, AI, climate, and want to leave a better planet for future generations.
Anything that I didn't ask you that I should have, or any parting words for listeners?
Well, no, most of all, thank you for having us on the show, and really looking forward to connect everyone in the community and discuss next steps.
Sounds great, Indra. Well, this was an awesome overview. I really appreciate you making the time. Congrats on the recent financing, and best of luck to you and the whole Overstory team.
Thank you so much.